Well, one of the only inevitable things in life is disappointment. We're all going to hit it at some point, whether it's in our personal lives, we go through things. We run into the loss of a loved one or a disappointment in our career. And that's where we're going to focus today is our professional lives, especially and our careers and as leaders, as we're climbing up that ladder, so to speak. It's not a linear path. There are so many twists and turns and disappointments along the way. But the good news is that you can turn those disappointments that you run into rocket fuel, not just fuel, rocket fuel. I love that term that Coach came up with. I'm John Goehring. We're joined with Coach Jim Johnson here. As always, it's the Limitless Leadership Lounge. We thank you for listening to wherever you are listening or watching up on YouTube. Thanks for having us on today. Coach, let's dive right in because we got three things right now, three reasons that you can turn your disappointments into rocket fuel. And it's not so much just about just overcoming the disappointments. It's not just so much about getting through the disappointments and getting to the other side of them, but it's actually about using them, right? And actually making them the fuel to elevate you higher than you would have gone even without the disappointments.
Yeah, great point, John. And I think I could speak for pretty much you, certainly you and me, and pretty much 100% of our audience. So we all have our disappointments in life. So I think we could all relate to that. And since we're talking about certainly, I've had personal disappointments, I've had physical disappointments, I've had professional disappointments. But I know you said, well, and let's focus on a professional disappointment. So for me, this takes me way back, but it still hurts to this day. My dream when I left college, besides getting married to my beautiful wife of 42 years, was I wanted to be a physical education teacher at a high school and be a head boys basketball coach. That was my dream. And I got to that dream pretty quickly. After 3 years at 25 years old, which is pretty young in my profession, I became a head coach at a school about 20 minutes from where I grew up. And I was fired up and I was excited. And of course, after two games, we were 1-1. I thought we're okay. And then with my great coaching acumen, I led that team to 17 consecutives. Yes, you guessed it, losses. And then I was in an interim position, and they decided not to bring me back. I guess, in other words, you could say you were fired. And I was extremely disappointed. It was really humbling because the administrator had really led me to believe I was going to be okay. A lot of story to that, which I'm not going to delve into. But the bottom line is I wanted to make excuses. I want to blame everybody else. But after the smoke had cleared, I started to really think. And I said, you know what? I'm going to use this as a motivator. So I encourage our listeners that when you have a disappointment, use it as a motivator, what I call the burn in your belly that never went away. Because I coached for 30 more years after that tumbling loss of my first varsity job and ended up having quite a bit of success. But the burn in my belly, I want to just give you a quick story to illustrate that. Towards the end of my career, I had a very good team. And one of my rules is when I was preparing for a team, I would never look ahead. Now, I know in the college and the pros, they have assistants that'll look ahead, but I was basically a solo. I had assistants that were great, but they didn't do a lot of filming work for me. That was my job. But my rule was to never confuse myself by looking at film of an opponent before the other opponent. Well, we ran into a weekend. Well, Friday night we were on the road against a team that wasn't very good. Saturday we were playing a team that was ranked in the top five in the state. So naturally, you'd say I probably should start looking more at the team in the top five. But I stayed to my discipline. We prepared for that other opponent. We didn't play particularly well, but we did win fairly easy because the team wasn't very good. Well, the next day I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning because it was a mid-afternoon Saturday game after a Friday night game. And I spent 2 hours going over film and preparing. And then we had what we call a short practice, a shoot around for about an hour to go over prep. And the moral of the story is we ended up winning that game as well. But sometimes that burn in my belly, because I remember there was part of me that did not want to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and prepare. But that just a reminder, hey, remember my first varsity job? I lost my job. And I'm never going to let that happen again. So I really encourage you to use a disappointment as a motivator. How about you, John?
So, number one, disappointments can be motivators. Number two, disappointments can be course correctors. I truly believe this that sometimes we go through a disappointment in our life that is disguised as a disappointment, but really it's a blessing that's disguised. And we hear that term all the time, a blessing in disguise. I believe they're real. How many times have we been through something in our life and then it doesn't happen right away, but maybe years down the road, or at least, weeks down the road, we feel differently about that. And we go, you know what? Actually, I'm somewhat grateful for that. We could almost tie this back to your story, coach, because I'm sure when it's all said and done, how much gratitude did you feel for that first season, that things didn't go great, that you didn't think you had it all figured out, right? But I also want to just make this very clear, and coach, you said this too. There is a period where, coach, you called it the smoke clearing. There's a period of this disappointment is just overwhelming and I can't possibly see anything good come out of this. But for me, it was working in radio because that was always my dream leaving college was to work in radio. Was at the college radio station. I wanted to work my way up from radio into, a bigger city and be in a bigger market and make a name for myself and make a lot of money and basically become Howard Stern, right? And I'm so grateful I'm not Howard Stern. But long story short, the pandemic really derailed those plans or at least slowed them down. And I was furloughed from the radio job because everybody was. It wasn't performance based. It was just the fact that, the whole world shut down and we didn't have that opportunity to be in studio together. So it gave me some time to think. And I ended up dating my wife at that time and ended up deciding, you know what? This might not be the right path for me. And I'm noticing all the changes in the industry and people getting let go. And I was lucky enough to have that opportunity, a blessing in disguise. As I look back, I was devastated. I didn't want to spend a few months outside of this dream career that I had. And I thought my career might not be the same again. And it wasn't the same again, but it was a good change. It was a course corrector. Now I still get to work in radio, but I get to do it in the context of my own business. And I can stay right here in Rochester where my family and friends are. And I don't have to move around and work my way up to this big city. I found something even greater in the middle of a disappointment. And sometimes that's the course correct that we need. So again, that period of time where the smoke is clearing, you're angry at the world, you're disappointed in yourself, you're all those emotions. I think we all go through, what is it, the 5 stages of grief or whatever. And that's natural and that's going to happen. But just know that your emotions are not always representative of the reality of the situation. And sometimes that perspective years down the road, we can see those disappointments as, yes, a motivator and also a course corrector. So those are the first two, coach. And I know you have number three too.
Yeah, so I'll just say one thing because a very powerful thought you had there, John, is that, it wasn't a course corrector for me in the sense that I did stay in the same profession. But you know what? The amazing thing is that job that I took, that's like 40 years ago. And the
Mm.
amazing thing is, in those 40 years, I think that program has like 4 or 5 winning seasons. That's how bad they've
Wow.
been. They were bad before I got there, and they've stayed bad. So maybe the good Lord was looking over me and saying, that's not the right spot for you.
That's
So
a good
a little
point.
bit, a little different. But my third point is that in facing a disappointment, again, is realize that maybe you're not as good as you think you are. And that's what really woke me up. And so my third point is is now be a learn-it-all instead of a know-it-all. And that's too much. At 25, I felt I was a know-it-all, that I was going to be this great coach and leader, and I had so much to learn. So my third thing is really turn that disappointment into I've got to get better. And to do that, I really encourage people to have an intentional personal growth plan. And that's when I really started. I know in Dr. Covey's book, The Seven Habits, he talks about sharpening the saw. And at that point, I think that's around when the book came out. And I remember saying, yeah, that's what I need to do. I have to get better. And that really started launching me probably in 40 years of studying how to be a better leader. I ended up being an avid reader. I ended up going to a lot of conferences. I was an audio program addict where I listened to in my car. Now podcasts are really big, and I love doing our podcast, but I also listen to multiple podcasts because I'm always trying to find better ways to do things. And the only way you can do that is you got to keep feeding. And then I encourage people, I know we've mentioned this before, but have an idea journal. When you get an idea, capture it, put it down. I like putting it in writing. I know I'm a little old school on that, but I think the research says that putting in writing is even more powerful than typing it on a computer. So it really something that to think about is use that disappointment and say, okay, you know what? Maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was, and I got to get better. And to get better, you got to be intentional and be intentional about your personal growth each and every day.
Sometimes we don't give ourselves the opportunity to grow unless we go through a disappointment, right? And that's why what we're saying today is that disappointments aren't just little forks in the road that we have to get over. Disappointments aren't just things that we have to survive. Disappointments are actually opportunities to thrive. And you mentioned the title for this episode, including rocket fuel, and I was like, wow, that's intense, coach. Rocket fuel. Like not even like unleaded gas. We're talking about rocket fuel. So in your career, I know you've seen this. You shared the one really powerful example, but I'm sure you've seen it with other kids too in your program. And just the power of not just surviving disappointments, but thriving because of them, right?
Yeah, I'll give you one quick example. We had a player, I mean, J Mac was a great story, but I'm going to share another because I was fortunate to coach a lot of really good players and players that weren't so good, but got better. And I'll never forget, I have a quick story. This is years ago, and I had a player that was a junior that he barely played, and he had a lot of interest. He was actually very talented as a singer, and he was involved in the show choir and other things, which was great. But he didn't put a lot of interest in basketball. And so I had my meeting after the season with all the players individually. And I said to Mark, Mark, I'm guessing you're probably not going to try out. He says, oh, no, coach. Not only am I going to try out, I'm going to start next year. After I nearly fell off my chair, I said, Mark, you barely played this year and you don't seem like you really have that interest. He goes, no, actually, I really like basketball and I'm going to put more time. And I give the kid a lot of credit. He still had a few issues because he had some commitments that he would miss a few things, but he put so much time and energy. He came back his senior year and he started pretty much the whole season and was a great contributor to a pretty good team. So it's a really cool story that, and that's another thing about communication as a leader is, something you might assume about somebody else because you feel like they're disappointed. In my case, a basketball player that barely played, that he's going to give it up. And sometimes you're completely wrong. So I think that's a good lesson for all leaders that make sure you get clarity from your people. You might be placing them another job, or it might be they just want to get better on what they're doing, and they're willing to do that. And so that's a good point there, John.
Yeah, and as leaders, we do have to empower people when they face disappointments to not kick them and keep them down in that disappointment. And you could have easily said to that kid, "Oh, come on, man, you're crazy. Like just go sing in the show choir." And
Yeah, right.
but you didn't. you empower, and that's what we got to do as leaders. We got to empower people to be their best selves, to reach that potential that sometimes it shocks us how much potential. Sometimes it's 20 points off the bench in the final 4 minutes of the game, right?
Right, right.
Being the leading scorer, that's the potential that people have. It's unlimited. So it's amazing to think that our disappointments could not only be stumbling blocks, but they could also be our biggest elevators too. And that's why we wanted to do this episode for you, because these three things we truly believe from our experience can help you become a better leader and have better personal and professional success. So again, just to run them down really quick. Number one, as coach mentioned, was turning disappointments into a motivator, into fuel, right? That burn in your belly that never goes away. Some people like the whole idea of, proving this person wrong, or Michael Jordan, who was cut by his middle school team, right? And never forgot that for his entire career. Disappointments can be a motivator for sure. I believe disappointments can be a course corrector. Sometimes life has other plans. I believe in God. I believe that God has a plan for our lives, and sometimes that doesn't look like what we want it to look like in the moment, but we'll see why it happened later. And then finally, number three, as you just said, Coach, the power of disappointments to motivate you to learn and have that personal growth plan that we might otherwise not have. So again, motivation being those or I should say, disappointment being those three things to help motivate you into becoming the leader and the person that you were meant to be. Coach, it's always great talking with you, and we want to remind you, if you're listening to the Limitless Leadership Lounge or watching up on YouTube, to be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That is starting to grow right now. So although we were big on the audio platforms, we also realized that podcasting's huge on the video platforms now too. If you want to see us, or if you just want to listen while having YouTube up on another browser tab, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the updates that come through. I mean, we have some incredible leaders coming up for you in the next couple of months. The guest lineup that we have is unreal. So I'm excited to roll that out. And then also, if you're enjoying it on the audio platforms, be sure to leave us a review on wherever you're listening to, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and a whole bunch of others that I won't even name. So thanks so much for having us on the Limitless Leadership Lounge, and we'll catch you next week.